I went with a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. But when I finally touched down in Ghana, I realized I had nothing to fear. And so it just unlocked this curiosity that led me on these amazing adventures to 23 different African countries and then other African diaspora countries around the world, just learning more and more about the different cultures, the similarities. And that's where it all got started. That one trip, and what it unpacked was just realizing how much I didn't know.
That is Jay Cameron, today's guest, who's sharing a little bit there about his life-altering trip to Ghana. I think this story that you'll hear today illustrates the transformative nature of travel, how one trip can completely and utterly change your life, which is what happened to Jay. You'll hear all about it today in this episode. He also discusses the misconceptions and negative narratives around Africa and the importance of changing the narrative through travel media. Jay talks about the African diaspora. He shares his top 5 surprising experiences in Africa. I was wondering, why did he use the word surprising to describe the travel experiences you'll hear today?
Oh, I think it'd be surprising simply because these are things that you don't think would happen in Africa the way that I did it. And especially for someone who never spent any time or spent all these years afraid to go. And then some of the things I found myself doing, it's surprising.
There you go. And outside of discovering these new off the beaten path destinations in Africa, you're going to hear Jay's best advice for making big life changes, big transitions, and navigating them like he did when he went from running summer camps for many years to starting his tour company, Maximum Impact Travel, which connects people to Africa and to the African diaspora in the Americas, the Caribbean, and Europe. You'll get some business advice. It's just a ton going on in this conversation. I know you're going to love it, so let's get into it, shall we? Buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, what's up? It's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. Tons going on in today's chat with Jay Cameron. You can check out his work at MaximumImpactTravel.com. One of the things I love about his story, quickly, before we get into it, is this transformative trip he took to Ghana happened when he was 40 years old. And oftentimes I think we associate, or we can associate at times, the idea that you can have these completely life-changing trips, but they're more likely maybe to happen to younger folks. And, you know, maybe it's a certain ages where that happens, but it can't happen to such an extreme later in life. But if you listen to this podcast and you're around travel, you know that that's a limiting belief. I mean, these trips we take, you never know, is the next life-changing trip for you right around the corner? Maybe the first life-changing trip for you right around the corner? It's possible. Speaking of life-changing trips, stick around on the back end. I am going to give a shout out to a listener who is about to embark on one. Always love to share these stories because I think they inspire everybody here in the community. At least that's my hope. For now, please enjoy my conversation with Jay, and I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Jay Cameron, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. How you doing today?
I'm great. I was really shocked to learn where you were in the world because you booked a earlier time, and I was just assuming you were over here, but it's as if you've been up all day already. You're like ready to go. Where are you? Are you a morning person like that?
I'm not a morning person at all. I'm nocturnal. I like the night. I can be up all night. So I might be coming on the tail end of the...
Right on. Well, thanks for taking the time to do this. You got some incredible projects going on in your life, and it seems like a lot of this started with travel, which generally is a theme here on this show, but you know, it's not often that, or it's not all the time, I should say, that a trip completely changes somebody's life, career and everything. It sounds like that was the case with you. I know we're going to talk about that, and we're going to get into, there were some suggested topics that were sent over. One of them was some surprising experiences in Africa. And I know you brought a little list that I haven't heard. So we're going to get into all that. Yeah, let's start with the trip, because this was a life-changing trip. This is like sort of the title video you have on your YouTube channel. We'll link to all this stuff. It was your life-changing trip to Ghana. In it, you talked about hearing negative stories about Africa as a child and why it really didn't make you interested in visiting. And yeah, I wanted you to share a bit more about that and how the trip came to be in the first place after sort of the negative messaging.
Certainly. Well, again, thank you for having me. And I will tell you that when it came to traveling to Africa, it was an afterthought growing up. And in general, traveling around the world was like this dream, okay, one day it'll just happen, when I get older. And so the years started passing by, and I looked up and I said, well, I haven't been anywhere. I haven't done the things that I wanted to do. And there was always some sort of fear attached to it. But when it came to the continent of Africa, it was always a negative. Like, no, you don't want to go there. All these bad things are going to happen to you. You're going to get kidnapped. Your organs are going to get taken. All kinds of negative narratives. So I decided after a point, I said, that obviously, if you look at me, the term that I'm referred to as African American, but I really had no connection to the continent of Africa. And I decided to go in 2018 to Ghana. And when I went, I was I was blown away about what I saw, about, the way that I was feeling. I went with a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. But when I finally touched down in Ghana, I realized I had nothing to fear. And so it just unlocked this curiosity that led me on these amazing adventures to 23 different African countries, and then other African diaspora countries around the world, just learning more and more about the different cultures, the similarities, and that's where it all got started. That one trip, and what it unpacked was just realizing how much I didn't know, and then started taking people around the world with me. So that's the nuts and bolts of it right there.
That's incredible. Yeah, it's funny you say realizing how much I didn't know, because you think about going somewhere and opening up, and it's like, and you're there to learn. And then it's not about what you're taking in, but it's about that realization, how much there is to learn. You mentioned going in your 40s. Was there a lot of traveling in your life up until then, or was just traveling overseas like that in general pretty new to you?
It was pretty new. I had not traveled extensively. I'd been to the Caribbean once or twice, but outside of the continental United States, I hadn't done travel at all. And that was largely because of the fear factor that was associated with it. If you go someplace else, something bad is going to happen to you. So you just kind of say, well, let me stay close to home. And boy, you turn on the news, and every time you turn around, something bad is happening. So no, I didn't travel much at all up until that point. And I'm glad I discovered it, because I would be really upset if I got into my 50s and 60s and beyond and realized that a lot of what I'd seen was not 100% accurate.
Was it this trip? Because you mentioned going to like 23 other African countries, and I know now you've built your business, Maximum Impact Travel, which we're going to talk about, all around taking people to have travel experiences in Africa. But was it over a period of years that you started visiting these other countries? Were you on a long trip the first time? How did it unfold for you, chronologically speaking, I guess?
All right. Chronologically, I went to Ghana. This is 2018. Life-changing experience. So from there, I decided to go back to the continent of Africa. And my second country was Tanzania. And that's when one of the amazing experiences, I decided to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I don't know, what got into my mind, but I decided to climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Right.
And had the time of my life. And I began to understand at that point the cultural diversity and when I say cultural diversity, from all of the different ethnic groups on the continent of Africa, but also from a landscape perspective. West Africa is very different from East Africa. So Ghana is in West Africa, Tanzania is in East Africa. And I started realizing at that point that the continent held so much that I couldn't, I just said, I need to start exploring it. So I went from Ghana to Tanzania. Then that's when the pandemic happened. So that was, I also went to Togo and Benin, and that's right next to Ghana. So I did that in 2018. And then 2019, I went to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. Then everything shut down for 2020. And I decided during that time, as soon as the borders opened, that I was going to go back to the continent and begin to lay the foundation to take others back who wanted to learn to see the things that I was discovering. At that point, in 2021, we started taking our tours aggressively, as aggressively as we could, during that time. And from moving from that point, I decided that I needed to go see other places like Egypt and Kenya and South Africa and Sierra Leone and Cote d'Ivoire and Morocco and Namibia and Zambia, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia. So all of that started happening just kind of like a domino effect during the tail end of the pandemic. And then from there, it just started unlocking so much. I mean, just the differences in the people from Ethiopia and Namibia. You hear Africa and we think of it as a monolith without understanding there are more than 50 countries with thousands of languages and thousands of ethnic groups. So the people in Ethiopia are very different from the people in Namibia, who are very different from the people in Morocco. So it's understanding the history, the migrations, but then also the beauty. When you go to Seychelles and you see, and you're there and you're looking at the beaches in Seychelles and the beaches in Zanzibar, or you go down to Durban in South Africa and you see the Indian Ocean from that side of South Africa, but then you come over to Cape Town and you see the Atlantic from that side of Africa, or you go and you see, you begin to understand the falls, Moso Oitunya, which is also known as Victoria Falls, between Zambia and Zimbabwe. All of that just kind of adds value to you as a person, and that's what it did for me. Because now, when I talk about these different places, it's no longer a mystery. It's kind of like I've been there, I've seen it, I've tasted the food, I've been among the people. And it does something to really enrich you. I mean, that's what this experience has done. And that's what inspired me to start Maximum Impact Travel. It inspired me to write my children's book series, The Adventures of Darren and Destiny, and just really sharing this story around the world. And that's what is happening.
Love it. It's beautiful. It might sound strange to some people listening, or perhaps that grew up in Europe or some other places, to think that Americans, you mentioned the word, I think the word you used was monolith. Like, it was almost like Africa was just like one continent, and there wasn't the diversity and all the things you just described wasn't really part of the narrative growing up in the States. Like, we're around the same generation, I think, pretty close to the same age. And it's just, it wasn't. It sounds so weird because, like you said, it's so many countries, it's so much going on. There's so much diversity across the board. Yet, for some reason, the continent of Africa was just kind of said in like one sentence without breaking it apart and understanding it in its entirety, which is, it's so strange,
It's very strange. And when I was growing up, I would see the late night infomercials. I would see, send, $2 a month or whatever, $30 a month to help someone, help feed someone. So that I was thinking, that's pretty much it. There's famine, there's sickness. And it's not that doesn't exist. It does exist, but it exists everywhere. It's just that narrative was the narrative that was projected and promoted over the years. So it really made the continent of Africa undesirable to visit from a vacation standpoint. If I wanted to go with charity or something like that, then maybe that's how I would see Africa. I didn't even understand the differences in the Maasai. The Maasai people are very different from the Zulu people, who are very different from the Ashanti people, who are very different from the Berbers. Now, these are different ethnic groups all throughout the continent of Africa. They speak different languages. it's like they're as different as, somebody from, I guess, Norway, from someone who's from South Carolina in the U.S. So it just makes it's when you start understanding that, you just kind of realize that there's more to learn, more to see, more to explore. And then when you're greeted by the local community, I've had just the best experiences. They've been so nice and so kind. And there's a narrative in the U.S. is that if you go over there, they're not going to like you. If you go over, they're not going to accept you. And I just have not had that encounter. I've not had that experience on the continent. And it's just it's a beautiful thing to go and see for yourself. And so no one can take that from me. No one can come and say, well, Jay, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, well, I've been there. I've eaten with my hands. I've eaten with the fork and knife. I've seen the world from the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. I've been to the rock-hewn churches in Lalibela. I've climbed inside of the pyramids in Giza. I don't know how you can take that from me. I've seen it for myself. And so that's the beauty of it all. That's the beauty of travel. And I know you're well-traveled as well. So you understand what travel can do and how it can add such a level of insight to your conversation. And then it also expands your cultural vocabulary because you now understand the world in a different way through a different set of eyes and through a different context.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, you feel more connected to, like you said, when you're there with the people, smelling the smells, being a part of the culture in various places around Africa, around the world. It starts to break apart all of the media narratives, I think. I mean, this goes back to kind of, what you were describing with the late night infomercials and everything. This goes back to the importance of media, I guess, or just, finding ways to, if you're consuming news, if you're consuming media, to be discerning with what you take in. And if you're creating content or, like we're having this conversation today, and part of this is just like, so people that might be still under the impression that that's what it is are now maybe starting to change their minds just through this conversation. I mean, that's what is important, is changing the narratives. I mean, what do you think that travel, being in the travel industry now, working to bring more people to Africa and have these experiences like you had on your first trip to Ghana, which was life-changing. What do you think travel media is doing wrong? What do you think they're doing right? What can we do to make it better?
I think if we broaden our conversation, and because sometimes when you get in the travel industry, it's about taking people on trips versus creating these experiences. And you kind of look at it from a numbers perspective. It's okay, we want to bring people, we want them to have a good time, but it's ultimately about that bottom line. So if we begin to start telling these stories and really sharing it through different lenses, because obviously if there's a media narrative, that media entity is, if you take it from a larger perspective, is owned by a corporation or a company, or whether it's privately held or publicly held, and that they have an audience that they have to serve. So that audience might not be interested in some of the nuances or some of the different aspects of the cultures that are on the continent of Africa. So typically, if the larger entity is there, they'll say, okay, this is what our audience wants to hear or see, and this is what we're going to focus on. And so for those of us who, and this is the beautiful part about social media, is that it gives more people more voices to be able to share their perspectives. And I think as we have conversations like this, it now piques curiosity. And someone says, I think I need to go and at least look at this a little differently, because maybe I don't know as much as I think I know. Maybe Africa is not just a charity case. Maybe there's a lot of wealth on this continent. There are a lot of billionaires and millionaires and people doing quite well in different countries, and all the different countries in Africa. And so when we start to sit down and have these conversations, what it does is it causes people who are, rational in their thought process to say, there might be a little bit more than what I've seen over the years. And maybe we can explore. Maybe we'll consider taking a trip to someplace that they hadn't considered before, simply because someone else is offering a different perspective. And we have to be intentional about it. And that's what we're doing by having this conversation right now.
Yeah, I'd imagine as a company owner, is that part of the challenge for you? Maybe talking to some of the people who were in your shoes before you took this trip, where you had the fears and sort of the misconceptions and different things. And you kind of have to overcome that hurdle for some of these first timers, right? Is that challenging?
Absolutely.
How do you navigate that?
It can be challenging, but I actually enjoy it because when someone tries to say, "Oh, why are you going to Africa? Why are you doing? Oh, they don't like us, or they don't want this, or they're going to kidnap you." I said, "Well, let me show you this. And let me take you on this journey. I'll show them a video. Say, hey, check out my channel. Here, watch this." And then they see it and they're like, you know what? I think I might need to explore this a little bit more. So I welcome the challenge because I know how I thought for so long and I know what it's done for me. So if others can have this experience, it makes it's almost like I want to find that person who's resistant and then say, hey, consider this. I'm not gonna shame you into going or anything like that. It's like, hey, well, we have a great time and take a look at the experiences and listen to the testimonials, listen to what others have to say, and see for yourself. Oh, I didn't know they had 5-star hotels in Africa. I didn't know that they had gourmet upscale restaurants in Africa, first class malls in Africa, but I'll even take it a little step further to say that, well, people do still live in huts in Africa. They do in many parts of Africa. But then my question is, what's wrong with that? And then they stop and think, what's wrong with that? That's their culture. That's how they live. That's what they do. And then when I've been in the huts in the Maasai village and they explain to me how they live. So I'm learning something. And so what it's doing is taking away my criticism, if my Western criticism, and now starting to see it from a different perspective. To say these people have existed like this for thousands of years. And this is their culture. And who am I to say that it's wrong? Who am I to say that it's uncivilized? Who am I to say that it's something wrong with that and they should now become like me and live like me when they've been doing just fine for thousands of years? Perhaps there's something I can learn here. I go to West Africa and when I'm there, everybody says, oh, they're starving in Africa. The people need us to take them shoes and clothes. And they're just, and I go to West Africa. And first of all, it's in a tropical region. So they can grow any and everything. So I'm looking at all of these gardens and sugar cane and corn and yams and cassava. And I'm looking and I'm saying, well, they're not hungry. Okay. And then everywhere I go, they're selling clothes and everything is on the street. The street vendors are right there. And I'm thinking to myself, could I live off of the land like that? No, I need a grocery store. I need, I'm dependent upon the grocery store, but they can go out and grow their food, their chickens, goats, and cows everywhere. If that's what they want to do, they have an endless supply of food in that particular part of Africa. And it's so you learn and you stop and you say to yourself, wait a minute. I'm the one who needs to shift the way that I'm thinking. And I think that as more and more people travel or they see the stories that we share, it makes them want to go see for themselves. And then when they get there, they're like, wow. And a lot of folks move back. It's very interesting. A lot of folks move to the continent, different places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love your attitude of looking at that fear-based mentality. Is like, let me find those people. I want to show them that's the power of storytelling too, right? I mean, you're basically like, here's what it is. We're going to share these stories and show you the reality of it. And basically shatter, any ideas that you have about what this is right now. And I think that also just as a business owner, I'm curious for you. I feel like for me personally, I always feel like I have to have a strong why. And it seems to me that you have that through your experience because you're seeking these people out, like you're saying, because you want them to have the breakthroughs or the things that you experienced after your life-changing trip. And I mean, is that important to you as an entrepreneur? Do you have to have that strong why to get you out of bed and kind of tackling the day-to-day? As we all know, as business owners, sometimes some of the tasks, it's not the most fun, putting out fires and some of the mundane aspects of owning a business, but like that kind of powerful why can really carry you through, I feel.
That is the reason why. It's not about the money. I can tell you that. I don't even wake up in the morning thinking about the money. And I say that because obviously as an entrepreneur, you have to keep your bottom line, your expenses, all of that in front of you. But if that why is not there, then when those challenges do come, as far as, the administrative part and planning and the logistics, then you don't enjoy it as much. But that's why, again, I enjoy it because we create documentaries. We did a full-length documentary about Tanzania on Amazon Prime. I enjoy it because of creating the children's book series, because I want children to have a different narrative growing up. So the why is definitely there. And every time someone signs up for a trip, or every time someone says, I want to be a part of your experience, whether it's with some of our travel partners or some of our individual travelers, there's something gratifying about it. And there's something that takes me back to that first decision that I made when I said I'm going to go to Ghana. And I was afraid. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't want to go to South Africa first because I knew that it was very similar to the U.S. So I didn't want to go someplace. I was trying to go someplace different. I didn't want to do a lateral. So I said, well, Ghana's a good place, a nice mix between contemporary and traditional. And so I go back to that moment and that decision and the hundreds of people that we've taken back to the continent, all of the people that we're anticipating taking to not just Africa, but also Central America and South America. Because we've expanded now, and now that we realize that the Africa story is all over the world, so we're now going to all these other places and exploring. But I look at when someone in their 70s or 80s, they land for the first time, and it's their first time on the continent of Africa. And they say, well, it's because of you. It's because I was watching you on your YouTube channel, or because I heard about the story, or I saw I saw you on a podcast, or I saw the article, when you were in Travel Noir. I saw you somewhere and I wanted to travel with you and I trust you. And that's the why, because I know that if we continue to deliver a quality service, then the money comes. And that's what I say to anyone in business: deliver a quality service. And obviously, keep your eye on the prize, on the money, but focus your energy on that quality, and the people will continue to come. They'll tell their family and friends, and it will turn into a movement. I could have never imagined what has started since then. I knew on my first trip in Kumasi in 2018, I was at a Chinese restaurant in Kumasi, Ghana. And I said to the tour operator, I said, I'm going to bring people back. I said, people have to see this. I said, we don't know. We don't understand what the treasure that's here in Ghana. I said, we just don't know. We're thinking one way, and we really need to grow up. Yeah, that was what I was, because I realized at that point I was a child. I was a fully grown man, but from a cultural perspective, I was a child. And I needed to grow up, and I needed to change the way that I was thinking. And so I know other people need that too, from all ethnicities, need to see it differently. And at least we are creating this bridge for them to have that opportunity and to have these experiences.
Can you talk about the African diaspora for people that are maybe hearing that term for the first time, and how that ties in with your work?
Excellent. Oh, that's a great question. It was a term I was completely unfamiliar with in 2018. I didn't know what African diaspora meant. I thought it was a big word that people who were, in the Pan-African movement, they understood it. And I was like, oh, they're using these big words. But the African diaspora are those who descend from the continent of Africa, who have been dispersed throughout the world. And there are a couple of diasporas. So the particular African diaspora I'm referring to are those who have been dispersed, or are descendants of those who have been dispersed throughout the world as a result of the dominant slave trades that happened on the continent. You had the transatlantic slave trade, you had the East African slave trade, and then you also had the trans-Saharan slave trade that was happening, that was intercontinental. So there were many people who were taken from the continent of Africa to places that we now know as Brazil and Colombia and South America, and into the Caribbean and into Central America, and even into what we now know as the United States and into Canada. So I didn't understand the different patterns, but as I was learning more history from the continent, I was in Ghana. I was tasting jollof rice. Ghana's known for jollof rice. And I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, which is Gullah Geechee land. That's in East Coast of the United States. So I was eating the jollof rice, and I said, this tastes really familiar. First time having it, I said, this tastes really familiar. I said, I don't know. I've never had jollof before, but it's something about it. And it tasted very similar to what we know in Charleston as red rice. So that started piquing my curiosity, and I started seeing similar foods, black-eyed peas, and black-eyed peas in Ghana, black-eyed peas in South Carolina. When I went to Brazil, black-eyed peas. I said, this is getting to be interesting, this whole rice and peas combination. And then when I started learning how many people were taken to Brazil, how many people were taken to Haiti, and then where they went from there, it just led me down this road of wanting to learn more. So I went to Brazil, and I thought I was somewhere in West Africa, in a city called, oh goodness, it's escaping my mind right now. So when I went into Bahia and I went to Salvador, the city is called Salvador in Brazil. And I went and I was looking around and I said to myself, all of these people look like me and I look like them. And I said, what is going on? And until I opened my mouth, they did not know that I was not from Salvador. And this is not El Salvador, because when people hear it, they think El Salvador in Central America. No. In the state of Bahia, in Brazil, there's a city called Salvador. And this is where the largest population of those who were enslaved and taken into Brazil, that's where they entered into the country. Now, you will see this in Rio de Janeiro and other parts of Brazil, but I looked around and I was walking around, and me and this one gentleman, we looked at each other and we were like, wait a minute. You would think that we were cousins because we favored each other that much. And so you see this all over. When I was in Cuba, same thing. When I was recently in Colombia, similar experience. When I was in Honduras, when I was in Belize, when I was in Costa Rica, I'm looking around and I'm saying, wow, and I'm in Haiti. And then, when you have these encounters and you recognize, I don't need DNA to show me the connection, that is where the African diaspora comes into it. And you begin to realize that all of these connections, by way of culture, by way of genetics, by way of just the way that we're built and the way that we move, you start to see that there are more similarities and more connections throughout the world. And that's, for those who are wondering what that means and why it's important, is now you understand that the term minority, they'll say, well, okay, I grew up in America feeling, okay, the minorities. Well, when you go to Africa, anywhere pretty much in Africa, you find out, well, maybe not so much a minority here. But then when you go to someplace like Brazil, and in particular in Salvador, you realize maybe not so much a minority. And it just, again, it tells a different kind of story. And that's why I believe it's so important.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, that's a huge part of what you do. I mean, that makes it a lot different than the sort of the normal travel company in a way, because you have this layer of connecting people to, I imagine some of the people, you guests that you've taken on trips, I imagine it's probably been pretty emotional for some of them to connect with a place that their descendants were stolen from. How have you seen people return? How have you seen their lives changed, I guess, after making these connections that you just described? Like, that's your personal experience, but you're providing the opportunity for other people to have that experience as well. Yeah. What have you seen?
I've seen a variety of emotional responses, from tears to laughter to anger to realizing that the education system in America has not taught us the things that it needs to teach us about that part of the world. It's just given us a sliver, or it's given us a skewed perspective. And I've seen all of these responses, and that's whether, I've seen it everywhere I've been. And what it does is others say, well, my family now needs to understand because we were thinking this way. We thought that, because there's a narrative they tell many African Americans that if they go back to Africa, those who are in Africa, they don't like you. There's this other narrative. Oh, well, they sold you into slavery. I tell them all the time. I said, I've never been a slave, just to let them know. But it's that narrative is being pushed. And although from back during those times, that did happen, but that's just the one piece that we've been told. So when you go back and you hear the story from that part of the world, you understand the complexities of what was going on the continent. So that awakening for so many people, because so many who are part of the African diaspora abroad have been fed the narrative, well, they sold your ancestors into slavery, so they really don't like you. And the people who are there on the continent are like clueless. What you discover is that many people who are on the continent, in particular West Africa, where the transatlantic slave trade was happening, many people don't even know the history at all. Are not even aware of what happened. And there are many people who live by the dungeons in Ghana and don't even know what happened in the dungeons, because the education system in Ghana is controlled by foreign interests. And so, so it's kind of like when you start to put these pieces of the puzzle together, you say, wow, I did not know that, because again, when you go to school, oh, well, what happened when your ancestors came, they were slaves and this is what it is. And you've been struggling all of these years, and you discover that the story is the context of the story is much broader. It's deeper, and there are many more aspects to it. And that's when people begin to travel. And again, this is all ethnicities. We've had all of ethnicities come with us, and they get there and they find out, wait a minute. They didn't tell us this in history class. Why didn't they share this piece of the puzzle? And then understanding what happened, with the Berlin Conference in 1885 and how Africa was carved up into these different countries, and, which countries had the dominant influence. All of that comes into play. And what it does is it's an awakening. It's an enlightening moment. And I think that what it does at that point, the fear starts to come down, and people really can begin to reflect and say, okay, let me understand my context of my journey in whichever country it is. A lot of folks from the UK, a lot of folks from Canada, of course, the United States, and they say to themselves, this is deeper, and now it's up to me to do something different. I can't blame everybody anymore, because I'm taking responsibility for my own education, my own experiences. And this is what I see. And it empowers so many around the world.
Do you want to share your list now? We got these 5 surprising experiences in Africa. I think it will be fun, and we can do some destination stuff. Then I do want to circle back, because I'm going to have some other questions on the back end of this. Just a bit about your journey. I want to hear about your experience on Kilimanjaro too. I don't want to let that slide. But it sounds like that was pretty amazing.
Say, that's one of the experiences.
Okay, cool. Well, spoiler alert. We were talking about this conversation beforehand. This was one of the things that you could bring to the table was this idea of surprising experiences in Africa. So that was one of the bullet points you kind of mentioned that you could discuss. And so, ask if you could put together this list, and thank you for doing it. But before we get into it, I just wanted to hear why you use the word surprising. And I think I understand based on everything you just said with some of the narratives and the misconceptions, but maybe you could just give us a sentence or two as to why you think these experiences would be considered surprising to, at least to maybe the average American, we could say. I don't know.
Because
what do you think?
I'm looking here. I think it'd be surprising simply because these are things that you don't think would happen in Africa the way that I did it. And especially for someone who never spent any time or spent all these years afraid to go. And then some of the things I found myself doing, it's surprising.
Okay, cool. All right, lay it on us. I don't know if you have these ranked, or these lists are always fun because, you could wake up tomorrow and change it around, but these are your top 5, I'm imagining, surprising experiences.
Oh, yeah, so I have a couple extra. There's some bonus ones in there. But
all right. I love a bonus. Yeah. I love a couple bonus recs. Okay. All right, give it to us. What's the first one here?
All right. Well, Senegal is a country in West Africa, and it's not known for safaris and all. Well, it does have some, but it's not known like East Africa. But something surprising that I did in Senegal was I was actually walking with the lions. So that was something that I did, walk with the lions. And there were 2 huge lions in front of me, and we were walking, and that was surprising. And it surprises most people when they see the video. They're like, he's really walking with the lions. And that's one thing that happened in Senegal. Then I was petting a cheetah in Zanzibar. And Zanzibar is an island in East Africa, which is a part of the country of Tanzania. And here I was petting this cheetah. And so this was a wild cheetah. Of course, it had someone there. I wasn't just walking up to it, but it doing this in the wild. But it was a cheetah that was taken from the wild, and so I was petting the cheetah. Then here's something else surprising that I did. Also in Zanzibar. Zanzibar is known for being in a tropical region, and so I decided one day I was going to go out and do dolphin watching. But I didn't realize that it was also going to be a major storm coming at the same time. So I'm on one of these little boats. There's a little motorboat, and there were 2 other people with me. And we're going out probably about 5 miles off the coast of Zanzibar. And there comes this storm. And it was coming down, and it just kept coming down. And we're just sitting there. And I mean, it's just pouring down rain. But we did get to see the dolphins. Eventually, the dolphins showed up, but that was something surprising. And then another surprising part was climbing into the pyramids. I didn't know you could climb inside of the pyramids in Giza, Cheops, the Great Pyramid of Cheops. That is something, I'd always heard about the architecture and the way that it was built and the precision. But when I went inside of the Great Pyramid of Cheops in Giza, and I looked around and I could actually see how they laid the stones and how it was cut, it was perfection. And in other parts near the Sphinx, that was a fascinating experience. Now here's one that's kind of light, but surprising for me, I found myself eating with my hands. And I mean, we eat pizza and hamburgers and everything, fries with our hands, but when you get down in the soups and the stews and everything, I'm a germaphobe, so I'm always washing my hands and sanitizer. So for me to get down and eat with my hands, banku, fufu, a goosey soup, all of this, that's another surprising experience in Africa. It really took down, going to the continent helped to break down a lot of the fears that I had. I also, now this is just something, when I was in South Africa, I ate, they call it, it was like cow's stomach. Yeah, so that was another surprising moment. They were like, just try it. I was like, but I did. And it was not very good. Let me just tell you, but that was a surprising moment. And so those are, I've had some other moments where the boat broke down in the middle of a thunderstorm and we're just sitting out there, lightning, and we couldn't do anything. We're just sitting there and it's just pouring down rain. That's another story that was in Nigeria. And so those are just fun, some of the fun. That wasn't fun at all. But the other ones were fun experiences. And I think that for most people, if they're going, they will be surprised because some of the best massages I've ever had have been on the continent of Africa. Some of the best food I've ever tasted, some of the best experiences, cultural experiences have been right there on the continent. So now I know you want to talk about Mount Kilimanjaro. I know you want to get around to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is one of the more popular. I mean, obviously going on safari and Kilimanjaro, probably the 2 biggest things that most tourists go to do, I would imagine, like if you were just doing a broad general survey. And so I didn't want to skip over it. I wanted to hear about your experience. I don't know if you had a lot of hiking experience before that. How did it go down? What was the experience like standing up there? It sounds like you made it to the top, which congratulations. No small feat.
Thank you.
No pun intended.
I know, right?
Yeah, just talk about that for people listening that are curious about having that experience. What was it like for you?
Oh, one, I'm not a hiker, and that was the first major mountain I ever climbed.
Oh wow!
It was the most. Oh yeah.
Pretty
it was the
intense,
most challenging.
Right?
Very intense. It was the most intense, challenging experience of my life. But it was also the most rewarding, or I'd say definitely in the top 3 most rewarding experiences of my life. I decided to climb Mount Kilimanjaro after going to Ghana. And I just, I was making up for lost time. That was the bottom line. I was like, I need to do something different. And I wanted to do it in Africa. And Mount Kilimanjaro is the tallest freestanding mountain in the world. And it's also the tallest mountain in Africa. But I didn't know what I was getting myself into. You know how some people can tell you a story and they can say, well, you're going to have this experience, you're going to have this, and it's going to be tough here. But because I'd never spent 8-9 hours a day hiking, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I trained, I did a lot of walking. I'm a cyclist, so I was, preparing by riding my bike a lot, but none of that. I should have been climbing mountains every day, in the area. I got to Kilimanjaro. You couldn't really see the mountain because the clouds were just kind of blocking the view. So we start going up the mountain, and immediately I knew I was in trouble because the backpack I had too much weight. As a content creator, you're carrying all of your phones and cameras and all of your gadgets. So I have all of this in my backpack. And I'm walking, and I said, oh, if I have to do this 8 hours today, I'm not going to make it because it's just too much. I never trained with my backpack. So, but they had porters that were there that could help you. So they took the backpack. We're still going up the mountain, and the climates would change. You started off in the rainforest, and then it dried out. They called it the Alpine Desert. And then by the time you get to the top, it was snowing, it was freezing. And so all of those different climates and altitude, I just didn't know. I hadn't had that encounter before. At night, it would be freezing cold, but you would look up and the sky would be so clear. And we just took it was 6 days up, 2 days down. They cooked for us on the mountain. We had porters that would cook for us. And so each step was a new lesson for me. And it kind of put into perspective that whenever you have a goal, the journey towards the goal requires those steps. And each step had a lesson, it had pain, it had accomplishment. So I would think about that, and I would have thousands of those steps each day because I'm now ascending, I'm going up, and it's hurting. My legs are hurting, my back is hurting, my mind is hurting. It's cold, the temperatures are changing, everything is happening. They don't have bathrooms for you, to go to when you're along the way. So it was just an experience, to say the least, camping on steroids. But finally, it was summit night. Summit night is the night that you actually are supposed to climb, and then you reach the top by sunrise. And that night was the night, I believe, was preparing me for what has now happened with Maximum Impact Travel, because it took everything in me mentally and physically to get to the top. Now, some people have a different experience. They're like, oh, it wasn't too bad. I was like, well, I'm not a seasoned hiker, mountain climber, or anything. I said, I just kind of took this. It took everything in me to get to the top. But mentally, when I wanted to quit, I had this one moment where altitude sickness started bothering me. I would see other people taking off of the mountain on helicopters because they couldn't do it anymore. It was just that kind of experience towards the end. And I had to make a decision. I said, well, am I going to go back down this mountain I was only about 2,000 feet from the top. I said, am I going to go back down this mountain to know internally that I'm going to have to finish this? I'm going to have to come back here again. I said, so if I go back down the mountain, I'm going to have to climb down another 17,000 feet, all to know that I'm going to have to climb 17,000 feet again to get to the 19,341. I said, so why don't I just finish this out? As much as I don't want to, as much as I could justify quitting, as much as everyone would understand this is your first time on a major mountain like this, hey, go back and do it again. I said, no. I said, I'm going to go all the way to the top. And I said, if it takes me until tomorrow to get here, I will do it. And I slowed my pace down, and I said, I'm going to get there. And I just slowed it down. And it was very emotional because when I saw the sign at the end of that, I knew everything mentally that I had to push through. I knew that I was listening to my music, and even after a while, my music was I was like, I just need to focus. And when I saw that sign, I knew in that instant my life had changed because my mind had changed, and I pushed through barriers that I didn't even know existed because I'd never been to that altitude in my life. I'd never been to that physical. I was depleted physically. I was depleted mentally. I'd never been that exhausted across the board in my life. But I knew when I got there, I was like, wow, I did it. I did it. And from there, it was like, you know what I can do? And, they tell you as children, you can do anything if you put your mind to it. You don't realize until you have to. So that was Mount Kilimanjaro. And I encourage everyone to find their own Mount Kilimanjaro, whatever that might be. It might not be the physical Kilimanjaro. It might be completing that book or completing a goal that they have that's messing with them mentally and or physically or whatever, whatever it is, to push through it and experience that adrenaline rush of accomplishing that goal. And the next goals that come won't be as difficult. Or if they are difficult, you'll have a reference point to say, I can get through it.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible, man. Congratulations. I mean, it's the perseverance and hearing the experience. It's like you rewired something in your brain. It's a great example of just like, yeah, it's one thing to hear the platitudes of like, yeah, I think, you can accomplish anything if you put your mind to it, but then to actually put your mind to something, go way beyond your comfort zone and accomplish it, and that changing you forever in that moment. That's hugely powerful stuff, man. I mean, that's the power of travel right there.
It is. And I encourage everybody to do it wherever you are in travel, wherever, if you want to go, do it. So now, I used to be afraid to fly. I was terrified of flying, but now obviously I can't go around the world and not fly, And so now places that I would always, right. So now places that I dreamed about, I can go to. I'll get on a plane and fly anywhere. We're working on a new documentary about Ghana. I was in Costa Rica and scouting out some new destinations we're working on in Costa Rica. And I had 10 days that I could start the filming in Ghana. So I flew back over to Ghana from Costa Rica, filmed, then flew back to Colombia. So now Costa Rica and Colombia are like literally a 2-hour flight away from each other. But if I had that fear, then I wouldn't have been able to do it. And so those are things that I hope to inspire. That's why I say the why is so much greater than anything else. And hopefully this will inspire someone to say, you know what, let me step outside of my comfort zone. Let me do it scared. Even if I'm afraid, let me still do it. And even confront the fear. I was talking to, I don't know if you've ever heard of John C. Maxwell. I was talking to him probably about 20 years ago. And I asked him, he's a leadership author. And he was talking about fear. And I asked him, I said, well, are you ever fearful with what you do? And he said, yes. He said, but he has more courage than fear. And so basically the courage overrides the fear. And I always held on to that nugget to say, even when I'm afraid, I may have to be afraid and still do it. But because fear is a natural human emotion. But if I do this, even while I'm afraid, I'll have more courage to override the fear. And that's what I hope for anyone, that's listening and watching.
For independent travelers that maybe aren't going with a group, outside of the sort of the main things like we talked about, Safari, Kilimanjaro, some of the things that most people know, but if you were going to send some independent travelers listening to some places that most travelers don't go or that maybe aren't on their itinerary in Africa, what are the 2 or 3 spots you would recommend for them to check out?
Okay, that's on the continent of Africa or outside of Africa?
Yeah, no, on the continent of Africa.
Okay. Let's see here. So many places. Oh, wow. That's a good question. I would recommend that someone go to Tanzania and spend some time in the Serengeti. So I know that's popular, but really spend some time there. I also would recommend going to Senegal and spending some time there in Dakar, because there are a lot of hidden treasures in Dakar. The Pink Lake, the culture of the people. So that's some place that, and these are all places that you can navigate easily. The visa process is very simple. And, but sometimes you hear about them, sometimes you don't. Obviously Ghana is very popular right now. So that's a place that I would recommend. Now here's another place that I enjoyed that you haven't heard me talk a lot about. Namibia.
I've heard so many good things.
You will not be disappointed in Namibia. So definitely check out Namibia. And the biggest thing I think sometimes people are wondering, well, do they have accommodations. Am I going to have a hotel to stay in? Are they going to have food? They have everything that we have in the West or Europe. They have everything in the places that I'm telling you about. And of course, South Africa is very popular. I enjoy the big three cities, Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg. I enjoy Pretoria as well. And there's so many other places in South Africa, and you can't go wrong there. And then I think about coming to the West, and I'm going to throw a name out there a lot of people are not expecting me to say, but Lagos, Nigeria. Lagos, Nigeria is a special place. It's a huge city. There's a lot of traffic. You want to understand how to navigate Lagos. But once you get immersed into the culture and you know where to go and what to do, there's a lot that Lagos, Nigeria has to offer. And I find, I remember I used to say, I never want to go to Nigeria. I don't want to go to Nigeria. And then I met some people from Nigeria in Ghana, and they changed my perspective. And when I went, I found that Nigeria was one of the most fascinating places that I've encountered in Africa as well. But for the individual travelers, to kind of circle back, Tanzania, Namibia, and Senegal, those are some places that I definitely recommend.
Amazing list. I wanted to get your advice on a lot of listeners, and they've had this experience, or maybe they're going to have it soon, where they go on a trip and it changes their life, much like you had. And sometimes it's hard, although you experience all these changes, you come back, and then after a period of time at home, maybe you go back into the same environment, you're around the same people. Sometimes it's hard to integrate those experiences in life, or you might come back with some ideas on how you're going to change your career, or, go from what you're doing to something else. But then it also can be challenging too. And I know you went from running summer camps for children to becoming a tour operator after having this life-changing experience. Yeah, I know you can only speak from your personal experience, but would love your advice here for anybody listening on making those types of big transitions where you have it could be a travel experience or a life experience that changes your life. And now you have to process that. And then you have to actually do the practical things it takes to kind of make the transition and the change, despite maybe fears or ideas, or maybe not even getting support from people around you, depending on people's circumstances. How did you manage that transition in your life? And what would be your advice for anybody else?
It's funny that you mentioned summer camps. I now have a running joke. I tell everyone, I said, I ran summer camps for 12 years. I said, there's really not much difference between taking the tours and summer camp. I said, now I'm just doing adult international field trips. And so everyone's like,
yeah. I get what it's like adult summer camp. No, not quite the same, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, right. That's funny.
Seriously, when someone is looking to make that transition, there are a lot of things to take into consideration. One, you want to look at your financial situation. And then you want to, that why, again, is very important. Why do you want to do it? Because sometimes it might not always fall into place the way that you're expecting it to. So you have to be prepared. Is that why greater than maybe some of the disappointments that come along with making a transition? Everybody might not support you. So if you're looking for everyone to say, hey, you know what, good deal. Some people may say, no, you shouldn't do that. But you have to know why you're doing it. And that's the thing that you hold on to, and mapping out a solid plan. The solid plan is going to be very important. If you don't have the plan, especially from a financial perspective, that's where most people find themselves going back and having to regroup. So I would say before you take off and kind of throw caution to the wind, that you at least have some sort of strategy that you can keep your financial resources coming in, because that's what you're ultimately going to need in the journey. You're going to need resources, even if you don't need a lot of them. You just need enough of them to where you can survive comfortably, and you can enjoy the reason why you're doing what you're doing, because it's nothing like getting out here and then finding out that, I have to go back and then dealing with that ridicule. But it's, again, if the why is strong enough, you have a solid plan and you think it through, then you make your move. And you can do that quickly. It doesn't mean you have to take years to plan this out. It could just be, okay, here's what my financial situation is. I can cut back here. I can add here. I can do this. I can do that. You can sit down over a weekend and put a plan together, and then you make your move. And then from there, you just kind of monitor it because that's what I do. I monitor it, I gauge it, and I just stay focused. I stay very focused. I block out the noise. I block out all of the opinions. I'm not seeking anyone's approval. I don't need anyone to tell me what I'm doing is right. I know what I'm doing. You know, I know my why. My why is strong enough. And if your why is strong enough, you will succeed. And that's the one thing about it. So that's my advice for those who are looking to make those pivots.
Great advice. Thank you. I was wondering how all of the travel has changed your relationship to your home base in DC, if at all.
Really not at all. Which, interestingly enough, it's actually helped me to appreciate DC even more. So when I come back and I see people and I see them, you know, they're excited because they see the adventure. They follow my journey. Of course, at first, you know, you have sometimes people, oh, why are you going over there? What are you doing? And you get some of that. But then after they see, it's like they want to do it too. Like, I want to go on one of your trips. I can't wait to go. I'm so proud of you. I've seen your adventures, and I bought your books. I tell people about you all of the time because I'm watching you on YouTube. I'm following you on IG. I'm paying attention. So my relationship now, and that's what we're featuring in the documentary. I shot a lot of it in Ghana, but we're getting ready to shoot the second part. And the second part is in DC and South Carolina. I said, there's no way I could travel all over the world and not remember how DC and the DMV, the Washington, DC metropolitan area, impacted my life. And and I have a greater appreciation for it now because of my travels. And so that my home base will always be the DMV, DC of the DMV. I grew up in DC proper. And it's just, I think now just being able to come back and share with my local, this is my local community. And if you will, this is my tribe. This is my ethnic group. This is where I come from. And so now I've gone and I found some hidden treasures all over the world, and I want to tell them about it. And that's the part that I love, you know. And same thing with South Carolina. I was born in Charleston, and I know what it's like, you know, growing up in that part of the world in the South in America. And so when I go back, I represent the Gullah Geechee people in Charleston proudly. Like, here we are. And, you know, I could go back and speak the language a little bit. And so it's like, hey, you going over to Africa? Really? What is it like over there? Hey, let me show you. Let me take you. Let's go. And a lot of people from South Carolina are starting to travel to different parts of West Africa. I was able to get my dual citizenship in Sierra Leone as a result of my connection to the Gullah. Yeah. It's my DNA linked right to Sierra Leone, and that's as a result of that whole Gullah Geechee connection in South Carolina. So all of these things happen, and so my connection is strong. I am who I am on both sides. Sometimes people want to get rid of who they are. They'll go and say, I don't want to be connected to that anymore. But I realize that I have ancestors my grandparents and my great-grandparents worked really hard to give me opportunities. And so now I'm making the most of those opportunities, and they're long gone now, but their work is not in vain because, you know, overcoming the fears, you know, I have opportunities they never had. And so now I'm going to make the most of it. And for the generations that come after me, they'll be able to say, wow, you know, somebody, you know, traveled the world. Somebody broke these fear barriers. Someone else left a blueprint for me to be able to follow.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Jay, you're an inspiring guy. I thank you so much for this amazing chat. Of course, MaximumImpactTravel.co. Do you want to drop any other URLs here, or just let people know where they can find you?
Sure. It's MaximumImpactTravel.com. So you can definitely catch us at .com.
.com. Sorry.
Yeah. No problem at all. And they can find me on YouTube. All they have to do is type in my name, Jay Cameron, or Maximum Impact with Jay Cameron. I'm on IG. You can type in my name, Jay Cameron. That's Jay Cameron official. And or if you type in Maximum Impact Travel, you can find me there. That's where I am on social media, LinkedIn, TikTok, all over the place. And would love to see and hear from your audience somewhere on the journey. And hopefully this touched someone along the way.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll link to it all in the show notes, and just really appreciate your time, Jay. I hope we can stay in touch.
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you so much. Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. I know you've been all over the world, and I thank you for inviting me to share with your audience.
Anytime. Cheers.
Thank you.
There you have it. I want to thank Jay Cameron once again for stopping by the show. Amazing guy. I'd love to have him back on. I see on his YouTube station he's actually working on a documentary. It's called Ghana, The Awakening, about the connection and stories of connection between Africa and the diaspora with some of the most knowledgeable experts from both sides of the Atlantic, according to the YouTube description. So look out for that. And, of course, check his stuff out if it resonates with you. Thanks for listening. Now, before I let you go, I am going to share a proverb from Ghana. I thought that was appropriate for this episode since it started in the beginning for Jay in Ghana, and that was the trip that transformed his life. We'll share a proverb from there. First, two things. A listener shout out, somebody who is about to embark on their own transformative trip. A reminder before I get into that, zerototravel.com/newsletter. You can sign up for the free weekly newsletter, and you know how much it costs? Nothing. You can sign up and keep in touch over there. I share musings, thoughts on travel, helpful links, whatever I find and curate on a week-to-week basis. So it's a great way to stay in touch off the pod. Again, zerototravel.com/newsletter. Now, I want to thank Carter for sending an email and congratulate Carter for doing what is sometimes a difficult thing to do, many times a difficult thing to do, which is to take the leap and choose travel. I got this email, says, thank you. Says, hey, Jason, hope you're well. I'm Carter, 22 years old from a small town in New Zealand. Don't think you can get much further than Norway. Just wanted to reach out and say thanks for the pods. I've been a listener for 5 years and have listened to many hours whilst completing my degree and driving to and from work. I finally finished studying and saved enough money, to go on my first backpacking trip. I even delayed starting a graduate job at Deloitte here in New Zealand, which is a bit scary. I leave in a couple weeks for a solo trip to Thailand, which I'm very excited about. Little bit nervous being a solo female traveler, but I think I'll be fine once I get there. My boyfriend is then meeting me in Europe, where we're traveling through the Balkans, then on the way back to New Zealand, stopping off in Mexico and LA. Woo! Thank you for interviewing a great range of guests on a variety of topics. It's definitely shown me different ways I can incorporate travel into my life. You and your guests have really inspired me to go out and see the world. All the best. I hope you continue putting out your podcast. Thanks, Carter. Well, thank you, Carter. I'm getting chills reading this because this is what the show is all about. This is a community-powered show. And so when I get an email like this, it's this is the intention, right? I've been doing this for 11 years, and still every time I get these emails, I get the goosebumps, and I'm just so grateful that I have listeners out there and that you're listening here today and that people are finding a way to take action to add travel into their lives. And it's not easy, to put off. I mentioned this in my email back to her. It's scary to put off a job like Deloitte or some prestigious job. Even if it's not a prestigious job, I'm using air quotes. It can be scary to kind of say no to a steady paycheck and to choose travel. And she is doing it, so kudos to her. And that idea of just incorporating travel into your life in different ways, I think that's one of the main missions here too, is to share a variety of ways that you can add into your travel tool belt, because you never know when you're going to want to pull out that tool and use it, because the way you travel and your life circumstances are constantly changing. So I hope that we can continue, or I can continue to bring you a wide range of guests and practical advice, inspiration, ideas, new perspectives, all that stuff. If you have any guest recommendations or topics you want me to cover, anything like that, you can always get in touch. Just drop me an email, leave me a voicemail, I'll leave a link in all of the show notes for that. And I'm here for you. This is a two-way conversation. It's supposed to be, and this is a community-powered show. I haven't said that in a while. I need to remind everybody this show is not about me, it's about you. So let me do what I can for you. And if you have something you want and you want me to put it on the show, or something to share with the community, a story, whatever, just get in touch and let me know. I'm here, I'm accessible, and I appreciate you. Okay, let me leave you with this proverb from Ghana, which is, if you are on the road to nowhere, find another road. Love it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.